I would like to think that every person watching this video most likely knows of Halo to at least some capacity. Well, I'm actually pretty sure that most people probably know of Halo to at least some capacity, obviously when excluding some of the more extreme age groups. Whether you were out there salivating over Halo 3 at the moment of its release, or eagerly anticipating what was a not very good Paramount show, I don't really think that many people are unaware of the franchise at this point. Also, just as a side note, I would very much so discourage any of you from watching the show if you haven't already, but I'm sure that this isn't any sort of revelation to you. The Halo games, on the other hand, pretty much found a way to single-handedly justify the Xbox's existence for quite a long time. And with this, it pretty much cemented Microsoft's foothold in the gaming space for like the next 20 years after its conception. And it's a grip which has only recently started to falter. Really, I can only think of like a handful of properties which have so easily built multi-billion-dollar enterprises on their backs. But Halo did this, and it did so while changing the landscape of gaming forever. A lot of what we currently expect from shooters or even high-budget single-player experiences can be attributed to the Chief and his undying beef with the Alien Covenant. And Halo being such a large touchpoint for so many new games reinforces what we already knew. This series is a classic, and there's really no other words I could use to describe it. Now, of course, Halo as a whole has been anything but consistent in recent years, and while I really did enjoy Infinite at its launch, I don't entirely believe that its rollout did justice to the peaks that this series has seen in the past. To be entirely fair, this isn't to say that the game is terrible, as I still haven't even gone through the entirety of the campaign quite yet, so I really don't have the authority to say something like that. But let's not kid ourselves here. The games that players think of when mentioning this series will never be Halo Infinite or any of the newer 343 titles for that matter, but the originals which saw Bungie at the helm. There's definitely a reason for this too, as the new games can be fun. But the older ones, they were so much more than that. Bungie found a way to craft something that was completely original, high quality, and most importantly, still to this day distinct from the now oversaturated FPS genre they're all a part of. I'm not trying to be a complete downer on the new games here, as Infinite really isn't all that bad, but at the end of the day, it still just isn't really Halo. It's an imitation of it, and in all fairness, it's a pretty good one at that. But it's one with seams, just like every other Halo-adjacent experience which is released in the past decade or so. Infinite is resting on laurels which have been exhausted since Reach, and there's nothing really that new to the experience outside of its open world, which, in itself, is becoming a somewhat tired feature from the AAA space. I feel the need to reiterate that more exposure to the campaign may still change my mind, but as it stands, the game really hasn't left me that optimistic for the future of this franchise, especially after investigating this dumpster fire. So while I actually probably will revisit Infinite down the road, or at least play its admittedly good multiplayer, for now, I want to talk about some of the most inspired and compelling video games that I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. The trilogy that managed to reinvent a whole medium. Now, just for an incredibly brief background to my history with these games, the first Halo game I had the pleasure of experiencing was the third title. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I find that most people who have a love for long-running franchises like this one tend to carry a bit of a bias for the first title they happen to experience. So, bit of a shocker here, the third title will always remain my personal favorite Halo game. There was just something so cinematic about the game that just completely won me over when I was younger. And while this spark is still very much so present in the other Bungie games, I just always found it to be strongest in 3. I thought that this may be important to mention, as seeing what I value in the series may be somewhat different than, someone who started on Combat Evolved, or Halo 4 even. Every game finds a way to focus on a new feature, and 3 just had the features I tend to value the most. Now, how exactly did I learn about the Halo games? Well, I was pretty young at the time, and I wasn't actually really allowed to play any other games similar to Halo back in the day. But just strictly due to the fact that I had an older brother who got the third entry when that game came out, I was given a bit more leeway with that title. I think the justification was somewhere in the ballpark of, they're just aliens. Yes, the aliens. I love killing the aliens. Jokes aside, I've been playing Halo for nearly 20 years at this point, and while you can probably tell that this series hits a little bit different for me, I can still absolutely say with certainty to anybody who hasn't played them, yes, they still feel just as new and worthwhile today as they did 20 years ago. Now, let me give you a history lesson as to why this is the case. The early 2000s was a pretty special time for video games as a whole. Many of the franchises which we now know and love were either created during this period or went through some major upheavals to remain current in a time of constant technological advancements. 3D games had been around for a little bit at this point, but companies other than Nintendo were seemingly only now just catching up to what was the largest technological leap in the history of the medium. Nintendo themselves had just come off the heels of the N64, and were now expanding their creative output on the GameCube, where franchises like Zelda, Mario, and Metroid were continuing to grow in this space. But at that time, the GameCube was somewhat of an underperformer, and other platforms such as the PS2 and Xbox had a massive opportunity to expand their own respective brands through growing their catalogs. Of course, it's in this window which we got some of the most significant video games to have ever been released. And honestly, I would say that Halo has to be one of, if not the most important of all of them. It's really a coin toss between that or the original Grand Theft Autos. Now, why is it the case? Well, broadly speaking, the original Halo acted as the turning point through which the FPS genre took off in mass appeal, especially in the console space. Sure, Combat Evolved wasn't the first experience to take a spin at this genre on a platform other than PC, but the innovations that Halo made to both the controls and sandbox mechanics for an FPS title represented a complete shift in what was to be expected from this type of experience. Honestly, other than the big man himself, Bungie was seemingly just better than everyone else at designing this type of game, as where other arena shooters could still be quite good, they just couldn't be Halo. The originals are all so incredibly well crafted from both a thematic and narrative sense, but I would also say that this isn't really where the series stands out. These games aren't defined through their complex narrative beats or deep character moments, but more so through the overall metric of game design. To put it simply, they are video games to their very core. There is a reason why they are so much more engaging to play than experiences made by actual psychoanalysts and slot machine engineers. It's because of the fact that the underlying design principles, the ones that make this type of sandbox shooter tick, are just so perfect, and all of them made with one thing in mind: fun. Well, and fluidity. Well, maybe also agency. Or accessibility. Shit, all that really matters is that every single moment in the original trilogy just felt so damn fluid and gripping in a way that other games couldn't even get close to achieving. The three mainline games are all still known for their great controls, insanely high production values, and their satisfying as hell gameplay loops. And this is even when compared to FPS titles released in recent memory. Honestly, these games all remain some of the most polished to have ever been released. And it's really funny to me that a corporation like Apple, one who is supposedly known for prioritizing the so-called package over anything else, were the ones to originally pass up on this opportunity and giving it to the competitors at Microsoft. Like, they incubated this project. And Halo is a goldmine from an aesthetic standpoint. And I honestly think it could be one of the most important factors to the success of this series. Now, when I mention this so-called goldmine of aesthetics, I don't just mean from a graphical fidelity or art design perspective exclusively. Sure, these titles still looked and felt better than any other game at the time of release. And honestly, I would probably still say that they look and feel better than almost any game released to this day. But almost any fan of this series knows that deep down, these games aren't just pretty. Their presentation is timeless. And how many games can this be said for? Titles will come out with deeper narratives, better graphics, or even more impressive set pieces. But stylistically, none of them hold a candle to what made Halo, well, Halo. There is a very tangible consistency which permeates through the entire series in a way that almost feels surreal. Anyone can see an image of this 24-year-old game and understand that it still looks somewhat pretty to this day, as honestly, it does. But there's also a stylistic cohesiveness to this package that makes it feel so much more than this. The music is the best, the art design is perfect, and the game design itself is still the most fun. But more important than this, each component feels made for each other in a way that makes the whole package feel significantly larger than the already perfect parts. There is a reason why every single company tried to tear down Halo with their own Halo killers, and yet not a single one actually succeeded. Yes, Halo was an incredibly popular game, but other publishers only understood that aspect of the formula, and not exactly why it happened to be the cultural powerhouse it was. There's a certain degree of vision that is required to make something like Halo come to fruition, and it's a vision that can never exclusively be born from a desire to imitate something. The passion was very much so there when it came to Halo, and it gave this massive game made by one of the largest companies in the world an almost personal touch. You can really feel the developers' intentions in the original 3 games, and it's this identity that makes them all so much more compelling than the so-called Halo killers. It also definitely helped that Halo was the one to pretty much usher in online gaming to console players through Xbox Live, and this really made it blow up in the competitive scene. But honestly, that's still just a footnote in Halo's impressively massive impact. You can make a game with a similar style to Halo, or even make a game that tries its very best to imitate its more open sandbox style of gameplay. But at the same time, every game struggled to feel like Halo did. And honestly, the feel, that's where Bungie did their best work. It's easy to say a game feels good to play. Like, watch me say so right now. Yes, Halo feels very good to play. But why is this the case? Well, there is a certain grandiosity present in the original Halo titles that is just impossible to miss when going through them. The original 3 games obviously intended for this to be the case, given the general stakes of the story and the near cataclysmic events that happen in almost every single entry. And let's remember, this pairs with the incredibly operatic soundtrack that everybody knows and loves. But I would also say that it goes a lot deeper than this, as I've never felt a stronger feeling of purpose in any game compared to that which you feel in Halo. Your next goal is never going to be that much more complex than going to a terminal, killing an elite, or saving Sergeant Johnson. But in all fairness, it never has to be. Having hands-off objectives with only a few lines of dialogue to contextualize your tasks is all that's really needed to make these experiences compelling, as the more gamey aspects of Halo should and always will remain the focal point of each entry. And they did a really good job at making this the case for the original trilogy. My favorite moments from the series will never be the cutscenes or the quick time event boss fights like you see in 4, but the progression of moving through such an interesting world and all it contains. It's just so freeing to play a game where you actually want to explore every corner of it, in the way that each title strings together amazing set pieces through their extremely tight campaigns will make sure that the more open sections never get boring. Pretty much every 2 seconds, the game finds a way to throw a massive roadblock at the player like the Scarab, or even several instances of world-ending events. And Master Chief along with Arbiter always somehow find a way to make these massive moments feel controlled. Actually, Halo does an excellent job at convincing the player that the enigmatic Master Chief is the only person who can stop the Covenant threat. And honestly, this is still the case for the newer titles as well. But the fact that the originals found a way to do this while you're actually in control of the Chief adds a whole nother layer to it. You don't just feel his dominant presence in the scripted segments, but also in every moment that ties those sections together. The Doom-style super soldier trope is one that, yes, could very easily be considered as tired or overused, but I would also say that it works somewhat differently in Halo when compared to almost every other similar experience. I was never actually convinced that Chief was somehow this master of carnage or any sort of warmongering deity, but more of a sublime character who was almost divinely gifted to the Marines in order to win the war. He isn't some physical manifestation of human rage, but damn near a demigod chosen to represent the human race in their time of need. Kind of hilariously, they don't even really try to give reasoning as to why this is the case in the main trilogy. But I would say that this almost adds an air of intrigue surrounding the character that makes him so much more compelling. It's a carefully crafted shroud of mystery and ambiguity, and it's one that came crashing down when 343 tried to scientifically explain his origins in 4. I always found that some things are better off unexplored, and 343 took away from his original premise that made the simple story compelling. I'll dive back into that point in a bit, as 343's interpretation of Halo is off in more than one way. But for now, I want to describe the gameplay sandbox of Halo, as it's likely the most fun gameplay sandbox ever created. Do you know how in a good open world game you can see something in the distance and be like, yes, I want to go there, and that ends up being the main narrative arc for your character for like the next 3 hours or so? Well, Halo actually found a way to induce this kind of feeling through its combat. Honestly, I'm still kind of confused on exactly how they did this, but hell, they did. Halo easily has one of the most accessible and satisfying combat sandboxes from any game I have ever played. And not only does it do a really great job at empowering the player through giving them a massive variety of tools that they can choose from, but it also finds a way to make every tool feel equally as viable and satisfying to play with. Stealing a Banshee and flattening the enemy elites will roughly be just as effective as wearing them down with the assault rifle to finish them off with a dome shot from the Magnum. This game tries to adhere to the principle that if you can think of something you would like to do, there is a strong chance that you can actually do it. And this adds so much more replayability to these otherwise linear experiences. Honestly, the only other game series that would come even close to achieving a similar bar of gameplay variety from that time period would be Half-Life. But let's be honest, everyone knows that isn't turning into a trilogy anytime soon. Put simply though, Halo easily has one of the most flexible combat sandboxes I have ever seen. But even more importantly than that, it has one of the most accessible combat sandboxes ever created. Not only is it fun to think of 1,000 ways to approach each obstacle, but the game always allows for each path to be easily executed. This is honestly incredibly important too, as the Halo trilogy finds a way to consistently promote growth and mastery for experienced players. But it does so while keeping the bar for entry extremely low for beginners. And this is just so important for Halo's success, as these games also have one of the most complete and fun co-op experiences to have ever been created. If you have friends or family that hardly play games in general, it really doesn't matter. Halo is still the best option. And it's this fact that honestly made something really special. It's the game for all occasions. And it's one where you just want to replay missions over and over again, and at higher difficulties with increasing amounts of modifiers. This, on top of the goofy situations created by the best physics sandbox ever made, on top of one of the greatest community content platforms to have ever been created, on top of the superb multiplayer that, like the physics sandbox, can be hilarious, just makes these games perfect for all occasions. This is why these games are so prolific and popular, and it's this level of content diversity that is only seen in some of the older Call of Duty games and Halo. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty impressive what Bungie was able to accomplish, and aesthetically and narratively, these games are equally as inviting as the content offering itself, which just makes them the perfect package. Now, I've already generally discussed how these games' aesthetics aren't the selling point of the game. But after discussing the sandbox, I think it's important to retread some ground just to convey how important the presentation of Halo actually is. These games are easily readable, but it's not just that, they're incredibly arresting with their use of open space and color. They're all some of the best games to have ever been crafted from a visual standpoint, and you always know exactly what you are looking at, which is absolutely a feat in itself for a series as chaotic as this one is. With Halo's comprehensive physics sandbox, there is a world where this concept doesn't really make it past the drawing board with a game that looks even a bit worse than these ones do. It's undescribable how much worse these games feel when visual clutter interferes with the player's ability to read a situation. I am so happy that Bungie took time to work within their constraints to make something that looks as good as Combat Evolved. But narratively speaking, how does it fare with a more simple and stripped back approach to game design? Well, Halo never really relies on its story to get the player into the experience, but it does act as a means of ushering a sense of flow into the entire package. The stakes are consistently high, and the more significant character development moments are incredibly powerful, but they are never that deep. However, you cannot understate just how massive they feel. There is an artificial sense of significance which you can't help but notice when you're going through the original trilogy. And remember, this is on top of the earth-shattering soundtrack and incredible visual design used throughout these games. This just continues to make an experience that is, yet again, so easy to get into. But it does this while leaving a lot of room for you to deeply invest yourself into what these games do have. It's really the best of every world. Now, everything I just praised Halo for, 343 has found to be incredibly difficult recreating after carrying the torch for recent releases. This isn't to say that their games are explicitly bad, as some of them really aren't, but deep down, none of them feel nearly as complete as what had come out before them. I really need to finish Infinite, as I do still very much so enjoy that game, but I can already tell that it doesn't have the content diversity and consistency that made Bungie's rendition of Halo feel so complete. To be honest, I actually almost feel bad for 343, as I really couldn't imagine a more difficult task than to follow up 3 of the greatest video games ever released, with what I'll describe as a very good spin-off title, and what is maybe one of the best expansions ever released. However, with this being said, 343 does somewhat need to meet the occasion in the future. Infinite's launch was handled catastrophically, and there's really no way around it. Halo 5 was just utterly terrible. Mind you, this was after the incredibly mediocre Halo 4. The saddest part is that Infinite was so close to being great. The campaign needed a bit more variation, and while I'm not necessarily done with it, I have already felt the pain of moving through the Forerunner architecture over and over again. The bones are there though, and that's half the fight. It just kinda needs a little bit more. Honestly, it kinda feels like there's talent at 343, but either from a business or passion standpoint, they just aren't as proactive as Bungie proved to be. With this in mind, I don't necessarily think that Halo is done for, but I would say that I have relatively little hope that the series will reach the same bar it has hit in the past. However, remember how I said that all the Halo killers failed? Well, 343 proved to be the only true Halo killer in a sense. Sony found a way to produce what is the closest thing I have felt to a Halo replacement in Helldivers. I know that in many ways they fill very different niches, but somehow I still feel some of that Halo magic in that title, and I'm extremely excited to see where Arrowhead goes in the future. It's also kind of funny, I guess, that Bungie is now owned by Sony as well, but with everything that's been going on there, I doubt that they will reach their own bar of quality again too. So, while Halo may be slowly falling from grace, I guess there are still some things to look forward to as a fan of the series. Unfortunately though, I have a hard time believing that it will be on Xbox, or even have anything to do with the Chief. Just to wrap up this video, when you listen to people talk about Halo on YouTube, it, in most cases, is usually accompanied by a general feeling of melancholy, a yearning for a simpler time, or at least a time where games felt more original. Well, I definitely don't want to discredit anyone who feels that way, because I can definitely fall into the same trappings and feel the exact same. However, I would also say that Halo very intentionally creates a package that facilitates this melancholy from the player. I am personally convinced that if you have never played this series before and just started today, you would go through the exact same grief the Halo community has been feeling for years. And this isn't necessarily a testament to how bad video games have gotten, or even necessarily how good things were. This is a testament to how good Halo is. You don't get games like this anymore, that is true. But to be honest, we have never gotten games like Halo. It's just Halo. The first entry in this series, pretty much all the way to Reach, are all some of the greatest video games ever made. And while the newer titles can offer some great moments, they are just that, moments. I miss the impact of Halo, and the cutting-edge quality and consistency of every release. Honestly, I miss the perceivably overwhelming passion behind every aspect of these games, as the vigor and consistency of each title seems to be dwindling after each new release. I don't necessarily know what Halo is trying to be anymore, but I still feel the desire, the need to talk about these games. They meant so much to me when I was younger, and they still mean so much to so many people. So I just really wanted to gush over these titles for a while. They are relevant to this very day, and if anyone here hasn't played these 3 games before, well, I guess you could only call this the highest recommendation I could ever give. They are essential. Play them. In fact, the Master Chief Collection in its current state is probably the best collection of games ever released for the asking price. Having comprehensively talked about Halo at this point, I think it's about time to thank everybody for watching my video. I've been going through a slightly higher stress period of my life recently, and I just really felt the need to sit back and enjoy the melancholy that Halo consistently provides. To put it simply, I'm just extremely happy that I got the chance to talk about these games. I hope you all stick around to hear what is a very different tone of video when I talk about Dark Souls 2 next time, as hopefully that will be a fun game to talk about too. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you next time.